Somebody with a mild accent started to leave half-recorded messages on my telephone answering service, where one could only hear words like, you give me a call, or, give us a call soon, okay? I could not understand why such urgency, and indeed could not understand how I could return those calls when no phone number was left. Obviously, the person obsessively calling me on a daily basis did not realize that I did not have his number, and began recording his messages while the outgoing message was playing. Neither was he telling me his name. Later I wondered if he was the man who accompanied the other who obtained my phone number at that festival, pondering that perhaps he wanted to have more guide drawings, but without his number I could not respond. This situation continued for a while, and I felt sorry for him, constantly trying, but I was unable to answer him before he hung up. He relentlessly kept leaving his partially frustrating and agitated messages. When I was finally able to catch his call and get his phone number, I was able to talk to him. Following this, he gave me his address and invited me to his home in Caulfield to have a little chat. However, before going any further, out of respect and for possible legalities, I have decided to suppress his real name. Therefore, I shall identify him differently throughout this book as Damon. For many months, he interrogated me about why I did not respond to his phone messages. Unfortunately, this was going to be his trend for a very long time. Because of personal engagements, needing a little peace to do a number of things, I could not respond to telephone calls from people who did not disclose their contact details. However, he seemed to specifically target those times when I was unable or busy creating a piece of art. I knew it was causing a certain amount of frustration with some people like him, but I also had my needs and was not answerable to anyone. However, causing unnecessary frustration on their side and possible anger was not my desire, for one hoped that others could be a little more tolerant towards each other. I suppose it never entered into the equation with some people. They had to get what they wanted immediately, then and there. My very first impression of Damon was that he belonged to that category. However, knowing what I did, I could tolerate people with all their foibles. Obviously, he needed to learn about my personal trends, my nature, and my way of thinking. Unfortunately, many seem to lack the wisdom to comprehend the needs of others. Only time would tell how things would develop with this prospective new acquaintance. He was a very well-established Jewish businessman and very proud of his achievements, believing he had created his wealth through hard work and a little bit of luck. According to his own account, he owned a number of petrol stations and had several people working for him. Being interested in extraterrestrial phenomena and his dreams of being involved in a journey into space and other worlds, he chose to call at least one of his petrol stations with a name related to his interest, asking me to design a new logo for him. I made a few suggestions, and he selected one. He appointed the services of a few other people known to him to create the title, and was very proud of doing so. He was originally a tradesman, working for a company which had built the hotel complex Hyatt on Collins in Melbourne. He was divorced and had two lovely daughters he adored. They were living with their mother and father-in-law, who was extremely rich, and, as he called him, a boss. His wife had custody of their children, whereas he had legal access. He often offered his beloved daughters large sums of money to buy things for themselves. He also had great interest in his young lady friends, except for one we will speak about a little later. His home was huge, with old mud cons and a big swimming pool, often visited by his friends, who he called his boys. Many of them and their families often gathered at his place to celebrate special holidays as well as Sabbaths. Occasionally I was invited to attend those festivities, although he, like many of his friends, was not particularly religious. They all enjoyed the traditions. During those times, a passage from the Good Book was read, and prayers uttered in Hebrew, followed by a communal feast, and much trivial discussion on every subject imaginable. Such activities added color to their lives. Everybody seemed to be very happy. When invited, it gave me the chance to practice my Hebrew and Yiddish. I was able to converse in their language, with some minor lack in my grammar, but there were those who offered me a helping hand to learn and correct some aspects of the language, for which I am thankful. Those occasions reminded me of the times when frequenting the shul, or local synagogue, in St. Kilda, at the invitation of friends for celebration of Purim, which particularly the children found delightful. Many of my Hebrew-speaking friends were very happy and nice to each other generally. Damon was initially a very friendly and seemingly generous person, aged about 45. However, having learnt a little more about the most puzzling human nature after all these years, could one really trust people in general? Had I become unnecessarily overly cynical about life? This thought passed through my mind like a lightning flash. But what did I have to lose if I played the game of believing, although deep down I could not, without being pessimistic about the issue of trust? Throughout my life, I experienced too many anomalies and much mistrust. Too many so-called friends had proved themselves to be untrustworthy, and certainly untruthful. Therefore, I remained a very neutral observer, while making sure that my new friends could never notice it behind the personal mask where I lived. For them, I was simply what they saw in me, and I was never the type to betray or tell untruths. What I knew and observed always remained behind closed doors, until I was satisfied with their readiness to share my discoveries. Otherwise, I was happy to remain a mystery. However, I am honest in all my undertakings and associations with people, whether they accept me or not. Some described me as a puzzle, and somebody who knew a lot more than what he appeared to. On the other hand, there were those who considered me not as sophisticated as themselves in intelligence, education, and even their social standing. When Damon and his associates met me, they seemed to appreciate what they discovered, for it was easier to communicate intellectually with them. No matter what their background was, whether a lawyer, supervisor, office manager, actor, laborer, or businessman, it was not of any concern. To me, it did not matter who they were or what their social standing or occupation was, for I respected and accepted them all. They all had their own ideals, their own questions about life, just the same as I did, and it was refreshing to talk with them, knowing they were comfortable with my qualifications and knowledge, unlike my so-called family. There were also those who chose to remain pessimistic and judgmental towards others, no matter what their origin, believing they alone belonged to a supreme race and were chosen by a greater authority to lead the nations. They were just like the witnesses I had encountered over the years. I have also respected them, for after all, their beliefs were based on how they had been educated, no matter how totally disrespectful they were towards others of a different persuasion. I always believe in peace. Therefore, in the face of inappropriate or very naive behavior displayed by anyone, I remain silent, yet ready to explain things without condemnation. This led me often being judged wrongly by extremists, like the Jehovah's Witnesses, who destroyed my beautiful family, and that many others all around the globe. They did this by using and manipulating the naive characteristics of people like my ex-wife. They proved themselves to be the most judgmental people against the entire human race. It taught me a very valuable lesson in life. It taught me to be aware of people's motives, not always trusting everybody, realizing that they were all fallible. But I remain an everlasting optimist about the human race. After his discoveries about my background, Damon wanted to become good friends, inviting me to meet his family, daughters, associates, and family friends. Being of Jewish origin and familiar with the ancient sciences based on the Kabbalah, he sought further enlightenment, but his findings were not enough for him. He sought for answers to his endless queries by consulting those allegedly learned occult practitioners. Although he was not entirely sure about the truthfulness of those mediums or soothsayers, he was befriended with Christie, who practiced the art. He used to consult her to channel to the other side, which was believed to be where all the deceased and guardian angels dwelt. During their special meditations, members of the other side had been imparting their knowledge about how to build his financial empire and conduct his love affairs with pretty women. Christie had been channeling for him for a period of time, but according to what he told me, there was something very basic and important missing. With Christie's blessing, he recorded most of their meetings for future reference, and let me listen to them. In those recordings, we heard her channeled information from a number of great teachers of the past, and his endlessly repeated personal questions, which the poor girl had been struggling to find answers to. But whatever she answered him apparently helped him decide what further steps to take to achieve his goals. When I met Christie, she told me she would be extremely happy to pass him on to me, for she had been relentlessly questioned on all kinds of subjects which interested only him. Answering him with the same again and again had been tiring, and she would be happier if someone else like me took over. Damon told me that Christie had spoken to him that their role was now to be transferred to someone very knowledgeable, and he would greatly benefit from it. It was obvious she had just enough, although it would be an interesting experience, and maybe one could help him to be more satisfied with his personal space in the world. If I could help anyone through the science of psychology to understand their own selves better and overcome some of their uncertainties, I would be happy. But did I need to be the one doing it? After meeting him several times over cups of coffee or meals in St. Kilda or Chapel Street restaurants, talking on subjects he was keenly interested in, he suggested that I could do the same as what Christie was doing by channeling between the two worlds. That took me back to the times when I lived in Perth. I suggested that we could try it one day, together with Christie. To me it was a little deeper than just inspirational speaking, and I was unsure how it was going to be taken. By this time he had somehow discovered my past association with Shirley MacLaine, a well-known star of the silver screen. I rarely met with her, and only when traveling, particularly in Peru. However, meeting people at such times and having conversations with them does not mean that we have known each other well. Shirley believes that there is something good in each of us, and that conversing with intelligences from different dimensions is real, and that life other than on Earth is a fact. She has many friends and associates, and I would be very surprised if she could recall everyone's name. She used to invite psychics and fortune-tellers to her home, and was very keenly interested in unusual and outlandish art, with a very poetic approach to the subject matter. She is a great thinker and has written several books, possibly after much encouragement to do so through psychic advice, and has appeared in great roles in films like Out on a Limb, which made her famous. Her book with the same title featured her affair with Andrew Peacock, her travels to Peru, and her discoveries. In my eyes, my role was insignificant, but I hope I had a positive influence on her. I preferred to remain totally invisible, unlike her other associates, and it was my personal choice. There have been people who would seek every excuse to consider approaching famous and significant celebrities, although some are unapproachable. Perhaps they deliberately forgot that celebrities are also human, living upon this earth we call home. But a chance meeting with the famous is not impossible. Damon was somehow knowledgeable that I met Shirley, and it gained his special attention. Having met somebody who had associated with the famous was of supreme importance to him. He had seen the film Out on a Limb, and fell in love with it. After discovering that I had met Shirley, he was very excited to associate with me. He insisted on believing that I knew her very well. Whenever I attempted to correct his assumptions, it seemed I was hitting my head against a brick wall. At every opportunity, he told all his friends and associates that I was somewhat related to Shirley. It was very embarrassing, and got completely out of hand. I had to resort to explaining that I wanted to keep some things hidden, as it was better that everybody did not know everything about me. Would this strategy work, I wondered. Damon constantly interrogated me, almost on a daily basis, with his endless questions in regard to Shirley's private affairs, which I had no idea about. Maybe I should have become a gossip columnist. By now I discovered what I was dealing with, but felt the need to keep quiet about my findings. By the look of things, my association was going to become devastatingly disastrous in the long run. It started to feel as if I had fallen into a dark pit. When we met at his place on a weekly basis, we conducted a little meditation and some channeling, which he wanted to record, but I did not get to listen to any of them. After about an hour, we discussed some of the concepts spoken about during the session, followed by his relentless questioning why I did not respond to his calls for a long time. Later he declared his ideals, an absolute desire to change the minds of people. He could not understand that the concept of changing one's own mind was the only way to see any favorable changes in the world. Just like my birthdays, while experimenting with channeling activities, I missed whatever had been channeled, as I had no chance to listen to them. In this case, everything recorded was kept by Damon. He obviously believed that he had found a significant treasure just for himself. When there was any attempt to declare that all knowledge was for the whole of humanity, he would strenuously exclaim that he hated the world of humanity. He often demanded, "Give me the keys, Professore, and I will wipe off all of humanity." When I met Christie for the very first time, while Damon prepared hot drinks, she discreetly exclaimed that she was so happy about my being there, for she was driven to the brink. Christy further explained that she was praying for someone else to take over, for she needed to be free again and have some peace from his endless questions. I wondered what all that was about. I was to discover it soon enough. Considering his demanding behavior, his endlessly repeated questions, and desire to wipe off humanity, as can be understood, I started to panic. I understood why she was keen to drop him on me, but I prepared to remain calm and reserved, believing that things would change for the better. As a reward, Damon later paid and organized a trip to Peru for her. When she returned and visited him, she could not hide her excitement about having materialized a trip of this kind, recommending that he visit that country. She told me she was now keen to materialize a laptop computer. I hope she got what she wanted. Damon told me that after attending a meditation session at Doreen and Jerry's, he was bored while sitting to relax his mind for a few minutes, but declared that he enjoyed the discussion, later suggesting that we could perhaps continue with the sessions he had started with Christy on a weekly basis, adding that there may be some others visiting him, and we could try to conduct a short meditation and discussion program like that, making me believe that Christy was also going to be present. When I questioned him, "No, Professore," was his response. "I think you should do the channeling, and we can discover many secrets about life, about people, about money." We started those sessions with some apprehension on my part, for when someone is not well known and there are no familiar faces around, one wonders what kind of reception could be expected. Imagine being in the presence of someone pretending to be friendly and having no idea what they were capable of doing. This assumption is not lightly spoken of, although we may be living in a world of people with friendly disposition. There are also a different group of people who may have unethical or even murderous intent. Alas, the world has become a battleground between good and bad, right and wrong. It would take enormous courage to engage in situations like that. There were times when sitting in a large seat in front of Damon, closing my eyes to concentrate on channeling with other dimensions, or possibly other intelligences, I always felt soupçon of fear within, a fear of being physically harmed, for I was in the presence of someone volatile, and was unsure what his response to unusual information would be. Then again, maybe my apprehension was ungrounded, although anyone with my previous experiences would feel likewise cautious. When I heard a small portion of the recordings he had made, his voice almost always sounded as if he was more fearful than I. However, I thought it was also very courageous on his part to invite someone he hardly knew into his house and question the so-called higher intelligences or another being from elsewhere in regard to his business and personal affairs through that person. On the other hand, whenever I was back in my natural everyday consciousness after those sessions, although a couple of hours might have passed, the time spent felt like only a few seconds, but I developed a degree of fatigue after every channeling session. Damon was incapable of noticing it, and I knew he was relentless when bombarding the other consciousnesses alongside mine with his endlessly repeated questions. Occasionally some of his friends or young daughters visited him, and it was quite a surprise for me to find myself surrounded by a few curious people after waking up from my experience. When Christy attended some of those sessions with him, she was extremely enthused. I also knew that my having met Shirley had made them feel part of the circle, but that association with Shirley was not of a permanent or intimate kind, as Damon wanted to believe and preached about. I did not want to live under the shadow of somebody, famous or not. I prefer to be me, and be accepted as I am. Not a pretender, unless I had a theatrical assignment I was paid for. However, my understanding was that Damon, being a very wealthy individual, preferred to pay nothing for the services he received. He told me that this was the best way to keep his riches for more important projects. I was expected to conduct those sessions only for the love of it, and nothing more. As far as he was concerned, I was an intellectual, and interested only in study and learning like one of his brothers back in Israel, who was not really interested in building his finances. That was certainly an interesting assumption on his part. From the very first moment I met Damon, he presented a character of wanting to be domineering at all times, although he did not realize that it was not possible with everybody. He relied on his wealth being the only medium to feel the utmost courage to control people, obviously unable to realize that not everybody worshipped money like himself, and his conveniently pretentious associates. He assumed that I would also adore and even worship him for his money, perhaps even considering financially profiting. This attitude was to become more and more evident later. Often he exclaimed that wealth was the only important element in one's life, and people from poorer portions of society considered the wealthy as gods. Maybe there were some like that within any given society, but maybe that was the way he chose to think of others, due to his current or past experiences, which I found to be very hard to comprehend. Through his attitude and words he clearly declared the poor as being arseholes, but the wealthy he considered as being highly intelligent. As time went by, and he began to discover a little more about me, he started to change his behavior, or it came across like that. But, as was his desperate need, his character of dreaming of absolute supremacy over others remained. He explained that he did not come from a very wealthy background, but when he was very young, a mature lady of wealthy Jewish origin in Israel had fancied him and shared a portion of her riches with him. I was to meet this lady when she visited Melbourne, much later. He had 2 gorgeous cars, as he called them, Mercedes and BMW. When driving them, it made him feel very superior, and his passenger was expected to feel highly privileged. Sometimes, when he invited me to accompany him when visiting 2 of his favorite restaurants, Sienna on Chapel Street in South Yarra, and one typically Jewish restaurant in Auckland Street in St. Kilda, he would sometimes ask me which one of his 2 babies he should take. You can guess what his babies were. He preferred his steak practically raw, and loved balsamic vinegar in a generous amount of olive oil in which to dip his bread, but there was no chance for me to enjoy the environment or food, as the whole time was taken up answering his multi-layered questions. Damon was very critical of his father-in-law, often complaining about him. He continually spoke of his own grand philosophies on wealth, often declaring There are 3 things in life people kill for. They are wealth, beauty, and intelligence, Professore, and I got them all. I visited him fairly regularly because delving into meditations and channeling were interesting subjects to experiment, although it required great trust and courage on my part. Obviously, he respected my intellect, or so I thought, but my insignificant association with Shirley was of tremendous value as far as he was concerned, probably hoping to meet her one day for some benefit he did not want to let go, and became obsessively possessive. Therefore, whenever he went on holiday, having a little break from him became a great need and relief for my own peace of mind. Many of his associates and friends began asking me how one could endure his special attitude as if he owned people. At first I could not really understand why they were so concerned about this issue, but soon it became apparent. When he spoke in terms of why my family wanted to keep away from me, although the subject matter was extreme, and I did not particularly want to talk about it, I felt obliged to tell him what he wanted to hear. Did he perchance desire to compare my circumstances with his own? Shortly after, he began to preach at every opportunity that they were all the same, and one could just let them go, no matter how hurtful it might have been. What else could one do anyway? He often said, "You should not have been so stupid to lose everything because of that. You should not have given everything to them. They can all get nicked, mate." Then promptly asked me what I needed to build my finances up, telling me he could help. It sounded very noble of him, but what could be his hidden agenda? Remembering he was very wealthy and loved controlling his friends, what did he have in mind? I never want to be dependent on anything or anybody. Therefore, accepting help from others like him would be impossible. When he did not get answers from me due to disassociation for a period of time, he was frustrated, as one could easily sense. I did not want to be bought and be obliged to return what was borrowed through hardship, for I have seen too many cases where people have felt devastated. I needed to remain independent and creative. Often under duress, I tried to explain my position to him, who had no clear understanding about my side of the story, insisting on helping me nevertheless. What kind of help? I wondered. It was anyone's guess. Did he by any chance consider that I might not be able to pay him back in time, as he may have hoped, because I did not have healthy finances, and all kinds of things could happen? Did he perhaps think that I might easily become his special servant in return for his kindness, thus paying back his help? Was he really genuine? I had experienced too many false promises from others, who proved themselves to be dishonest in all their undertakings. Worse still was being subjected to their unsubstantiated criticisms. It was like being subjected to unjust mistreatments from their side, while being complained about doing it to them. It was like hitting somebody on the head and complaining that the other person has done it to them, without being the case. You will understand if you have experienced these kinds of immature games, as I did. I did not want to have this experience again, hence my apprehension, but he made mention of not being fully appreciated for his kindness, forcing me to explain a few home truths about myself, although I was certain that what I said was not listened to. When Damon fixed his mind upon any subject, he would listen only to himself, yet I appreciated his concern and desire to help me recover from my past ordeals. Whatever the smallest investment I needed to establish myself, he was going to help me with regardless of what I desired, and go about it very slowly, and I repay him gradually when I had some additional income. He demanded that he was going to help me with my needs immediately. It sounded promising. I pondered long and deep upon my priorities and how I could generate income at home using my old computer. He asked me if I needed a new one, almost as if reading my mind, and I thought that perhaps somebody knowing me from a different dimension was inspiring him to think that way. In fact, a new computer could help me establish my finances through home-based employment, whether I had an outside occupation which provided me with ever-needed finances or not. As soon as I explained that it would be very useful indeed, he wanted to help me purchase a computer from one of the city outlets. You can imagine my joy having brand new equipment which I could do more beneficial things with. Later he exclaimed that perhaps I could do things for him in return for such payment, such as painting a work of art, for he would love to have original oil paintings on his walls. My discovery after speaking with some of his associates painted an undesirable tableau, forcing me to be extremely cautious. They clearly explained to me that Damon had the tendency of wanting to help anyone, thus lending them large sums of money, but for some unfathomable reason he would change his mind and the next day demand its immediate return. That somewhat frightened me, but thought there might not be any need to worry about it at this stage. By nature I was prepared for any surprises, because human life and social circumstances were not stable due to daily fluctuations they were subjected to, just like the crashing waves on the shore. In fact, I often observed him becoming extraordinarily agitated, complaining about why he should be the savior of others. Why should he be the chosen Messiah? He lectured me at every opportunity, especially after conversing with his sister in Israel. In truth, he began interrogating me more often, asking incessantly why I was not wealthy and living in a God-forsaken corner of Springvale. Later still, he told me all about his frustrations in regard to his great help, which he now believed was unnecessary, and his daughters needed a computer. He further exclaimed that he needed to learn a little more about computers. Although I was about to start bookkeeping jobs with a number of private companies, working from home, as expected, he demanded the immediate return of the desktop computer. In his latest preaching session, he told me that he hardly knew me, and therefore did not want to be taken advantage of. That, I felt, was one of his ugliest insults. But I kept my cool, for I was prepared for it, expecting something like this anyway. How could someone like him, or anybody else, think of me as taking advantage of others? Remember what I said earlier? Some people hit someone and accuse that other of hitting them. My world was shattered all of a sudden, and I felt a total darkness all around me. Since he behaved this way, giving me no time even to think other than being concerned solely with his personal issues, when he flew over to Los Angeles to meet his other friends, I took the opportunity to have a permanent break from him. I suppose any logical person would feel the same. Some of my genuine friends suggested I should sue him for his ungainly insults, but I simply wanted to be rid of him, because I had other issues to worry about, e.g., my own personal life. Joan was a little cautious about driving long distances. However, Edita's ex-partner Gus, who I met from time to time, was willing to take the precious computer and its parts to Damon's, he suggested we take them to Caulfield when going to the city. I was happy, primarily because it was like a sign of closing an unwanted book, never to open again, when we put those boxes, as they were originally packed, right in front of Damon's door, and left them there. During the last several months of associating with Damon, his acquaintances were telling me that I should be more cautious of him. Indeed, I was often seeing him in my nightmares, for he was interrogating me at every opportunity and lecturing me about how I should live on a daily basis. Eventually, through meditation and spending time on my own, pondering on more beautiful things in life, I was able to eliminate the negative and morbid effect of meeting with Damon. I wondered how long he had been on the habit-forming substances he often consumed. I had wasted a lot of valuable time with him, preventing me from generating a reasonable income, and for now I was almost penniless, having no money even to buy a small loaf of bread after paying my bills. I simply kept quiet about this and was absolutely determined to survive the ordeal without asking for any help. After paying important expenses like medical, rent, and utilities, I had nothing left to buy any food. I resorted to collecting edible grasses and weeds from the backyard, such as dandelions. I cannot imagine everybody being able to stomach such a diet, but I did. Whenever I found an orange or apple on the roadside in Springvale Shopping Center, I picked them up and could not wait until I was home to enjoy them. But at least I was happy and free. Although it was not possible to watch the sunrise or sunset where I lived, like those one could admire by the sea, a certain glow in the sky and clouds above the trees and rooftops was equally exciting to behold. Often I got up very early in the morning to have my regular morning walk while the world still slept. One of those mornings I wanted to capture the glorious glow of the sun's first rays on the clouds with my 35mm Pentax. Pointing my camera towards the sky just above the dwelling where I resided, I captured a very shiny and large metallic object with very bright lights flashing from it. I kept taking further shots following that slow-moving object. It was not imagined, for it was included in several of my photographs. It was not a known aircraft or helicopter, and was extremely silent, but intermittently one could hear a soft humming sound emanating from it. I was excited, knowing I was not completely abandoned on Earth, and was not alone. I could not wait until I had my pictures printed. I shared them with Joan and her family first. But when showing the images displaying the craft just above the dwelling to the owners living in the main body of the house in the front, they laughed in disbelief, taking it like a joke. However, I knew what it was, and it was real to me. I was forced to take yet another business study course by the employment office, despite my personal and health-related issues. This would allegedly help me, like those others urged to do the same in building my own business, to satisfy the criteria if I wanted any government assistance for low-income participants. My sessional lecturing was insufficient to make a living from, and having a higher education had become a curse in finding a part-time job. This meant having to travel long distances every day for a period of time. Having prepared a business plan in producing training videos and other audiovisuals, my proposition was immediately accepted by the relevant branch of their department. When and if successful at the end of this specialized course, a mentoring program for a short period of time would be made available, and a bank loan to establish one's business in earnest made easy. It was during this time my once-upon-a-time art student, a dedicated participant in my meditation sessions, and genuine friend Rosemary helped me with transport such as going to Box Hill College. She was dedicated in helping a friend in need without any gain in return, just like Joan and her family. This made me ponder about how wonderful it was to know that we are not alone, abandoned in a foreign land, with no one to turn to. No matter how successful I was with that short course, it seemed that there had to be at least one person amongst the other friendly tutors who was in opposition to my idea of creating special fractal animations. He took a sample video and played it at his family home, and when returning it back, he exclaimed that there were a few devil worship-related images in the program. I was shocked. It was again as if I was having a life in utter fear and restrictions forced upon my personal space, like in the days of my association with Jehovah's Witnesses. But that reference to the devil was, in reality, unjustified. I had simply utilized mathematical equations and fractal geometry in creating the entire clip. There were no religious implications and certainly no devil-related imagery. In fact, many other friends have seen those videos too. Even those religiously inclined friends and associates seeing them could not find anything evil. Otherwise, they would have certainly reacted to this experience negatively. But all of them declared that my animations were very pleasant to watch. That one tutor at the college felt the need to fail me at the end of the course just because he thought my animations contained devil worship-related segments, and so he could not recommend it. That was most certainly reminiscent of the fanatical cultist attitudes to which my ex-wife belonged. Gradually, I was beginning to put my life in order during this break from Damon, capturing many aerial phenomena on film and video, and still continuing with my meditation groups at Jones, despite having gone through major surgery with my hernias, which was taking time to heal. Alas, some friends were really not what they purported to be. Remember Jean I mentioned earlier? Obviously, she was not very happy with me making money by just sitting down and talking to people at her premises, and shortly after suggested we should do all that at my place, which was so small, only big enough to store my belongings and myself. She knew that it would be impossible to conduct any relaxation sessions, let alone accommodate others. As mentioned before, her excuse was that her sons wanted to watch the Olympics on the big screen, so we decided to continue with the meditation group at Jones. Ever since then, Jean strenuously gossiped negatively about me to all her friends. Rosemary decided to help me by furnishing a legal letter, for she had worked for solicitors in the past and was experienced in that field. She recommended in that letter for Jean to cease her negative comments about Suren, knowing that her daughter, who also happened to be a practicing solicitor, could help the mother understand the issue. The letter was friendly and not threatening, but from the moment of receipt, Jean apparently hated me even more bitterly. She tried really hard to stop Joan from seeing or helping me, but Joan could not deny her love and remained loyal to both parties. From time to time, she questioned me about what I thought of Jean. Discovering that I had no animosity towards her, she was happy speaking about what they were doing, or what they intended to do at ease, although I had no need to know. I have never been against anybody, even when they have spoken ill about me. Yet again somebody else had become hateful towards me, for I had not fulfilled their imagined needs. I have always been easily forgiving, although I could be very analytical and precise. The only concern in my mind was that both ladies smoked heavily, and I could not think of any good outcome for them from such an awful habit. From about the end of 1994 and during 1995, my existence became more chaotic and very confused, although I hoped to start something new, something that would hopefully normalize my inner world. No matter what I tried just to feel a little fulfillment in life, while surrounding my world with a number of new friends, nothing helped me with that vulnerable feeling. Alone and no one to turn to. I no longer felt free to be me. In fact, I felt as if the unfortunate victim of circumstances was me, a miserable man who was falsely accused of crimes not committed and forever punished in a dark, wet corner of a dungeon with a chain and ball attached to his ankles. Maybe some people of evil intent had been effective in cursing me, never to be happy. Could it be possible? But that was how I felt. I contemplated on how my ex-family and their godlike advisers, the Jehovah's Witnesses, would triumph in their Lord if they knew of my circumstances. I was so sure, without any prejudice, that they would all consider it as divine justice by their God punishing the unfaithful. Consistent with their preaching about the misery in the world, which was coming to an end, and the Son of God returning in his glory, all the chosen of God would be saved from the clutches of the devil. When they divided and destroyed a countless number of families around the world, including mine, using psychological gameplay under the directive of their governing body, did they also consider that, according to their teachings, all misery and hurt is attributed to the same devil? Ergo, could he have controlled their minds as well? As can be seen, after all logical consideration, their way of hurting people is exactly the devil's way, in line with their own definition of evil. My ex-wife, unadvised by the same, used to claim that the devil could create very colorful circumstances in front of people's eyes to convince them to follow the wrong path, but their own pathways had to be always right, although she could not see how completely against God's will it was. Could it not be possible for that same devil to lead the witnesses to hurt others, in which he or she delighted, while making them consider the whole experience as being Jehovah's will? Just think about it. They have caused much heartache and undeniable misery in the world. Even today, they attempt to ignore the so-called fallen, considering them as going with the devil, and they do not even desire to recognize them as human beings. If the disfellowshipped make an appearance in their midst, would they offer a helping hand for someone like that if that person was hurt in a traffic accident? I feel by studying those closest to me, they would be extremely reluctant in helping anybody like that. Remember, shunning is a part of their worship. These words are not said lightly either, and certainly not in a discriminative way. It is not an observation alone, it is a reality. They are God's will indeed. Speaking of the real devil worshippers, I feel further analysis into the beliefs of the witnesses would be perfectly in order. Remember, Jehovah's Witnesses consider themselves as the prophet, or small group of footstep followers of Jesus, pretending to speak of the coming days, which have never actuated, as they predicted, thus proving themselves to be false prophets according to Bible wisdom. Cautiously speaking of the Bible, I do not desire to be considered as if preaching, However, one needs to refer to certain texts. In Luke chapter 22, verse 19, we discover the words of Jesus, "Keep doing this in remembrance of me," in regard to his sacrificial offering to wipe off the sins of mankind. This relates to communion in the Christian world, but as far as the witnesses are concerned, only those belonging to the 144,000 chosen to rule can participate. Unleavened bread and wine is passed from one person to another in their kingdom halls during their only celebration, which they call memorial. John chapter 6, verses 53 and 54 states, "Jesus said to them, Very truly I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whosoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise them up at the last day." The Holy Scriptures do not emphasize it as anything other than symbolism, and in the olden language, eating is understood as consummation of physical or spiritual food. Therefore, it needs to be interpreted as taking in or full acceptance. On all fronts, the witnesses appear to ritualistically reject the symbolic body of Christ, if we take this holy advice seriously, but the text symbolically recommends us to accept Christ's sacrifice in order to be cleansed of our sins. Interestingly, satanic cults have similar, if not the same practices, even claiming themselves to be the angels of light. And Jehovah's Witnesses I came across also claim to be the same. Matthew chapter 27, verse 37, speaks of Jesus' supposed accusation written above his head, "This is the King of Jews." And after the death of Christ, his disciples said they had seen him, but one declared, "Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe." However, considering the sign above his head, the marks of the nails in his hands, and the Old Testament account about blood being painted on doors where it was applied to both the left and right side as well as on the top, symbolizing a cross, we need to ask whether he was executed on a cross or stake, as the witnesses believe. In all of the accounts, the cross seems to be the most accurate. The following texts need no explanation, as they clearly speak of those who claim to know the truth, just like the witnesses do. Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9 states, "For by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, lest any man boast." They did not recognize the grace that was the gift. John chapter 6, verse 29 states, "Jesus answered them and said to them, This is the work of God, that you believe in him, who he has sent. God gave his only begotten. Recognize him." Matthew chapter 23, verse 15 says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you compass sea and land to make one proselyte, and when he is made." Witness preaching activities look more and more counterproductive. Consider the witnesses I was unfortunately associated with, therefore needing to be analytical without discrimination. They all claim to belong to a faithful slave class and a governing body, which replaces Christ's authority as mediator between the Father and the Christian world. They are programmed to follow a dull leadership. They would only consider obeying their governing body, the Watchtower Society, which apparently speaks on behalf of God, and so are led to accept that it is okay, even when the governing body is wrong, for they are not inspired of God, as they have recently openly declared in their own video programs and Watchtower study articles. Although they are indeed uninspired, They all allegedly belong to the faithful slave class. The witnesses are expected to follow the uninspired leadership. They preach that listening to the faithful slave, which is the governing body, is as if they are listening to the voice of God. But how can anyone listen to uninspired men who are fallible, as they now publicly acknowledge? Remember, we are told that the Bible never changes, and it specifies Jesus as being the only mediator. It is being replaced by their governing body, which always changes due to their wrong interpretation of the biblical understanding and their own so-called prophecies, as with the supposed end of the world in 1914 and 1975, amongst others. Therefore, how can they be the mediators as they ardently claim? Remember also that they never encourage their members to discover the real truth through research, clearly presented by those who they hate, calling them apostates. However, apostates are usually ex-Jehovah's Witnesses with superior knowledge about the reality of the organization. One is expected to search all the information made available through their organization if they really are mature witnesses and sincere in discovering facts. Alas, without realizing that they are dulling their senses by blindly following blind leaders. In my case, hopefully, having learned a little more about the world, I was extremely determined to survive the ordeal and was not going to do the devil's bidding by becoming part of their or any other religious organization. As far as I was concerned, the darkness called religion was dead. I will repeat myself by thanking my ex-wife and her faithful brothers for helping me choose the right pathway through their behavior and self-made wisdom. Let me quote one of Molière's expressions, where he says, "It is not what we do, but also what we do not do, for which we are accountable."